Hey, good morning. It's day 2 of banquets, feasts, big dinner celebrations, and sort. We're looking at a variety of these in Scripture and trying to derive some truth and lessons and developmental help from what is going on connected with these. We're going to go back to Genesis today, Genesis 43. And believe it or not, we dealt with the book of Job last week, but Job is before Genesis 43. Because Job, as I said before, it really takes place around the time of Abraham. Well, now we're looking at Joseph. So you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph is the son of Jacob. So Abraham has long passed off the scene, and the Israelites are in the process of spreading out the way that God had told them to. So anyway, if you know the story of Joseph, it starts in Genesis chapter 37, and Joseph is the favorite child of Jacob. This was an unfortunate, way to express your love for your kids, but he made his favoritism known. The other kids became very jealous of Joseph, the other brothers, and they sell him into slavery into Egypt. So Joseph is 17 years old, where his own brothers sell him into slavery, and he goes through the ringer. I mean, he's falsely accused by Potiphar, an Egyptian's wife. He's thrown into jail. He's kept in jail. Other people come and go. He's still in there. So Joseph is 17. He doesn't know if he'll ever get out of jail in Egypt. Okay? He's in there for 13 years, and suddenly a couple prisoners that Pharaoh had put in jail, his butler and his cupbearer, they have some dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams. He then is brought to Pharaoh's attention. Pharaoh brings him out because Joseph had a visionary dream about a famine, a 7-year period of feast, and a 7-year period of famine that was going to happen after that. So Pharaoh makes Joseph, who is this Israelite prisoner, the number 2 guy in Egypt. And so this is where the storyline picks up. So the brothers had betrayed Joseph as just a young kid, sold him into slavery. When we pick up reading today, it is now 20 years later. They don't know what's happened to Joseph. They're certainly not going to recognize him because Joseph is decked out like an Egyptian. He's going to have the eye makeup and probably the shaved head and the headgear and all this kind of stuff. They are never going to recognize him. He was 17. It's now 20 years later. He's 37 years old. He's the number 2 man in charge of Egypt. And the brothers are coming to beg for food. They've already come to Egypt once to get food because of the 7 years famine the 7 years of plenty followed by the 7 years of famine. Joseph coached Pharaoh to store food, to save it. So anyway, they come to get food once because they're starving to death back in Canaan, and now their father Jacob has sent them back again. But this time Joseph is going to come a little closer to revealing himself. You have to understand, he recognizes them. They haven't changed any. They were grown men when they sold him into slavery. He's the one that's changed. They don't recognize him. All right, I'm going to pick up reading in Genesis chapter 43. And please, if you've never read the entire story of Joseph, Genesis 37 through 50, take the time and read it. He is one of the most special people in all Scripture. The guy does not have a Bible, and other than Daniel, there's no one other than Joseph and Daniel where there's literally no condemnation, and Noah, although Noah did get drunk. No condemnation about their character whatsoever. It doesn't mean they're without sin. It just means that the Spirit of God didn't point at it. Anyway, Genesis 43, verse 15. So the men, this is the brothers, the men took the gifts and the double amount of silver, and Benjamin also. Benjamin is Joseph's blood brother, younger brother. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. Now mind you, they don't know it's Joseph though. When Joseph saw Benjamin, which was his true blood brother, with them, he said to the steward of the house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon." So this is a big group. This is like 12 individuals. The man did just as Joseph told him and took them into Joseph's house. Now the men, the brothers, were frightened. I'm going to pick up reading verse 26. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. Joseph, as a young man, had had a vision of his brothers bowing down to him 20 years earlier. So Joseph starts talking. He says, how's your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? They replied, your servant, our father, is still alive and well. And they bowed low to pay him honor. Once again, the vision in Genesis 37. Read it on your own. As he looked about, and he saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, and the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." So this is Joseph, the Egyptian, saying to Benjamin, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room, and he wept there, and he washed his face, and he came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." Now, the rest I'm just going to fill you in on what he does. He sets the brothers at the table in the order of their age, and they're scared. They're really scared. They're like, how does this guy know so much about us? Now, Joseph knows them. Remember, they don't know him. When you get to the next chapter, he finally breaks down and he reveals himself to them, and it's a beautiful reconciliation. But folks, this is 20 years later. So there's a number of lessons we could derive from this, but I think one of the ones that to me is more practical and realistic, we go through life and sometimes we have very close relationships with people. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friends, business associates, fellow church members maybe, and we build significant bonds with them. We go through life with them for a season, and then things happen, and some of these people that were the closest suddenly become on polar opposite sides, and some of them may turn against us and seek to hurt us. I hope that never happens to you, but it can. These brothers, they sought to kill Joseph initially, and then they decided to sell him to slavery instead. But it's 20 years later, and 20 years can change a lot of things. Now, I use that word carefully, can. There are some people that 20 years later doesn't make any difference. If we're going to be bitter about things in life, we will only be more bitter 20 years later. But sometimes we mature, sometimes we gain objectivity, sometimes we gain clarity, sometimes we see that life is not as clear and simple as we might have viewed it in our younger years, and we gain a little bit of compassion and mercy and forgiveness along with it. That's what happened to Joseph. He was not angry at his brothers. He was not bitter. In fact, Joseph ends up saying to his brothers later on in Genesis 50, verse 20, he says, "You guys meant this for evil. You meant it for evil," meaning when they sold him into slavery. He said, "But God meant it for good, to save many lives," as he's done. So Joseph had lived long enough to understand that in spite of the imperfections in human relationships, and even sometimes our anger and our evil, God is always seeking to work to bring good even out of the worst circumstances. And like I say, you just go one more chapter and these brothers end up weeping on each other's shoulders. The love is restored, the relationships are reconciled, but it was 20 years. Now here's my point. It's possible that there was a relationship that was really, close, intimate, important. It broke down for whatever reason. You may feel it's hopeless, and it might be. Sometimes in this lifetime we cannot restore relationships. All relationships will not be reconciled in this life, but some in time can, because people change, events change, and more importantly, we change. So maybe the Spirit of God is tapping on one of us today to say, this is time for one of those Joseph dinners for you. One of those reunions of some sort with someone for some reason, because both they and you and God are ready to reconcile the relationship. I hope that's true for somebody today. Thank you.